Hello, everybody. We're going to give it another 30 seconds to a minute and then get underway. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, High Impact Strategies for Your Deep Energy Retrofit with FCM's Green Municipal Fund. My name is Jacob Gorenkoff, and I am the Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives at the Canadian Housing Renewal Association. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which I am currently on in Ottawa is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and I thank them for allowing me to live, work, and play on this land. So today's webinar is in real time. You should now, or you should soon see a title screen of our first presentation today and be able to hear me via your computer speakers, headset, or through your phone if you've chosen to dial in. As we're in webinar format, you're all muted. If you wish to ask questions, you may type them in the Q&A section on the webinar control panel at any time during the presentation, and we will address as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. So today we will be hearing from Stephen Dixon, a freelance energy consultant who's accumulated more than 35 years of energy management experience, including more than 800 energy assessments and the facilitation of over 1,700 energy management workshops. It's a lot, Stephen. Stephen holds a Master's of Applied Science in the Systems Design Engineering program from the University of Waterloo, as well as a BSc in Physics from UPEI. Stephen has extensive experience with RET-Screen and has successfully delivered over 25 RET-Screen training sessions and incorporated RET-Screen training into more than 100 energy management training workshops. Our second speaker is Caitlin Carroll. Caitlin is the Retrofit Services Manager at the Atmospheric Fund, where she looks at energy use in multi-unit residential buildings, finding ways to improve indoor environmental quality and resident comfort while reducing energy use. Her work involves research and testing of technologies, as well as consultation with residents. Caitlin was one of Corporate Knight's 2018 Top 30 Under 30 as a certified passive house consultant and a certified measurement and verification professional in training. She holds a Master's of Building Science from Ryerson University and a BA in Environmental Studies from the University of Toronto. And our final speaker is Jen Arnfield, the lead of Sustainable Affordable Housing at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Jen led the design of the Sustainable Affordable Housing funding offer and is currently focused on program continuous improvement and operational effectiveness. Prior to joining FCM, Jen led the development of the City of Calgary's Affordable Housing Strategy and 10-year plan, and you will likely see her cat make an appearance during today's webinar. Welcome, Stephen, Caitlin, and Jen. And Stephen, I will now pass the floor to you.
There we go. Great. Thanks very much, Jacob. So welcome, everybody. I'll go ahead and make sure we can see everything. Can you confirm that, please, Jacob?
Yep, looks good.
We're good. Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. So I've got 30 minutes to sort of to give you some basic ideas around deep energy retrofits, maybe introduce you some tools. Typically in sessions, we are looking at building skills. In 30 minutes, it's very hard for me to build skills, and especially in a webinar format without a lot of interaction. So what I'd like to do is sort of lay out the principles, and I'm going to kind of take it from the top in terms of energy efficiency and energy management based on the 40 years that I've been at this. And what I'll try to do is highlight for you different tools that are available to you. So I will show you a number of different references. I'll kind of have a glimpse at them, but my slides will leave the references so you can go and dig into those. You've already probably received from Emily a copy of a RET-Screen key that will allow you actually to dig into the RET-Screen software too, which I'll take a few minutes to highlight before we finish the webinar today. So again, it's more about the objective from my point of view. This session is to lay out the tools and the resources available to you, and I know the folks from that are going to follow me will have more of those things. So it's going to be rich in resources, I think, for you today. So taking it from the top, I always start every seminar or every workshop, every training intervention that I do with a slide. And it was funny because I used this a little while ago when I was doing a session for a group of people from the sustainability sector within a large organization, 300 people from across the globe. And they said to me, Steve, why is there a dollar sign at the center of this? Like, and I said, well, that's interesting because I don't really believe the dollars are at the center of everything. Definitely in the energy thing, it's far more about carbon and energy. But for many organizations that I work with, and going back 40 years, the dollar was the thing that most people wanted to equate it to. So I try to bring that balance to it. It could be a green dollar sign, it could be a black dollar sign for carbon, whatever, one way or the other. It's when we bring these three things together that we will be effective. So I started off doing energy audits 40 years ago, looking for ways to replace technology that existed. But I discovered over the years, I was running by a lot of things when I was doing these very quick energy audits and not really taking the time to get down to the operation of a building. Today, existing building commission kind of addresses that. But a few years ago, well, a few now, for a guy my age, a few years ago, can be 20 years ago. Anyway, a social anthropologist I was working for in PEI said, Stephen, you're never going to crack this energy nut until you deal with people. Who better than a social anthropologist to tell you that? It didn't really mean anything to me at the time because I was this technical guy, and I go, but today I understand what she was talking about. And ultimately, we do have to deal with not just the technical aspect, but the human aspect of this, the awareness, the habits, the procedures of feedback. No matter what the context we're working in, certainly in social housing, that as many of you working, there's a very unique environment when it comes to the culture and sort of the social environment. But I've got an example today, even within that environment, I think there can be a lot done on the human side of it, because I think people do care. Fundamentally, they do care. And then ultimately, if we can work together as organizations to build that energy management culture, it just becomes part of what we all do each and every day of our lives. So to me, this is the goal here, is to bring it all together. We are going to be talking about technical things today, but I'm glad to see some of the presentations following me actually focus too on the behavioral or the human aspect as well. Because to me, I think that's actually what can get in the way if we don't do it properly. In fact, people can defeat or they can enhance what we do from a technical standpoint. The other side of this, and I'm going to make reference to the TAF article later on in terms of indoor environmental quality, but basically it's not just about energy. It's about improving the energy situation in your facilities, in your residential facilities, but at the same time, making sure that we don't impact things adversely. Like years ago, people would think, when I came to their building, I was going to cause them to freeze in the dark, suffocate, be scared, unproductive, unreliable, deny them what they need from energy. No, that's not what it's about. In fact, it's about enhancing what you get from the energy that you're using the minimum amount of energy and improving things in so many ways. For example, a domestic cold water booster pump, right, can require a lot of maintenance. That pump's deadheaded a lot of the time. If we go in and put a variable speed drive on that, right, the proper package for that, we can actually improve the reliability of that system pretty significantly. So there are many things that we can do that will give us both that energy benefit, which comes along with that, the sustainability and the environmental benefit, but also then the indoor environmental quality, reliability, all those things. So when we're building the case to do this, we need to consider all these things. And I use the acronym non-energy benefit, NEB, these things beyond energy. Now, the other side of this is we have to think about what is it we're trying to achieve. And I think for many of you, many organizations today, there's a twofold goal in all this. We have to be fiscally responsible. There's no doubt about it, right? So the cost is definitely an issue. Now, I do this pie chart these pie charts based on Ontario. This morning, I was doing a presentation in Manitoba, and on the carbon side of it, it was all natural gas, meaning that all your carbon emissions basically come down to the natural gas you use, because out in Manitoba, for those that are from Manitoba, your carbon in your energy supply from electricity is very small. And ultimately, in a jurisdiction where electricity is cheaper, you might have a much bigger natural gas pie in the cost pie chart. At the end of the day, I think it's worth doing this presentation. I actually used this presentation a little while ago in a webinar that I did, and a gentleman there not from a social housing context, but from certainly a housing context, said this was the single most important slide that he saw in the whole presentation, which, I kind of like that compliment. And it is impactful. It does get us thinking about what it is we really have to deal with to meet the dual goals that we're facing. A friend of mine has been known to say nobody cares about energy. We all care about energy. It's just that energy is the intermediary for these things. So in this situation, you've got a facility that uses the same amount of energy for natural gas and electricity, but because of the jurisdictional characteristics, cost, and carbon emission in the electricity grid, then those other two pie charts break down separately. It's worth doing this pie chart as a starting point for any facility we're looking at improving. if we're looking to improve a facility, I've developed over the years auditing techniques. A number of 25 years ago, I was asked to develop a self-assessment technique for folks in facilities based on my audit experience. So I came up with this idea of the 7 steps. The first 4 steps are really about understanding how a facility uses energy. The last 3 steps are about looking for ways to improve the situation. If you're procuring an energy audit, I would strongly suggest that your energy audit address these 7 steps in this way. Now, I'm not going to go through all 7 of the steps because I don't have that much time here this afternoon. I'm going to focus on the last 3, looking to the opportunity. But certainly, you know, a proper analysis of your existing cost, benchmarking, which is comparison, looking at a facility from the point of view of when it uses electricity and how it interacts with the grid from that point of view, and also the characteristics of how people are interacting within that profile of when electricity, and for that matter, natural gas. Saw a facility the other day. Natural gas meter was hooked up in a way that we could get hourly consumption. Hourly consumptions, we were able to determine that the boilers were not being sequenced properly. Huge opportunity for both reliability of the boilers, but also energy efficiency, and eventually being able to break down where it's all going. To me, that's an imperative starting point. Is we need to know what's using the most energy. We got to focus on those large users. And then we're going to go after waste, energy we don't need to use. Improving efficiency, how well we convert the energy from the purchase form to the end use form. Then eventually, and this is the path to net zero. When you think about it, net zero energy, net zero carbon, basically we want to minimize consumption with waste reduction, efficiency improvement, and then we want to find that renewable or alternate form of supply, right, to avoid having to purchase that conventional form of energy in terms of electricity or natural gas. So to me, this is a sort of a holistic approach to the technical side of it. It's completely consistent with net zero approaches, whichever one you want to follow. And I think it's a fundamentally a very sound energy auditing methodology. I'm just going to focus on the last 3 steps here, getting rid of waste or matching the need. In any facility today, when we do a recommissioning, we'll often start with what's called the current facility requirement, the CFR. That defines what the facility needs, right? What people in the facility, the temperature, humidities, ventilation rates, all those types of things. That's kind of like the hard limit. We can't touch those things, but we have to make sure we're not using more than that. And when it comes down to it, it comes down to turning things off. And many times that's still one of the greatest opportunities in many buildings is simply turn equipment off when it's not required. Now, you might have to use some automatic control to do that or rely on humans, one way or the other. It's a fairly simple opportunity and has a pretty quick return, turning things down. That's when we have to begin to control things now. We might not be able to turn them off, but simply controlling things better does result in significant energy improvement. And then eventually, well, the last one should say control it as a typo on that slide. So ultimately it should say, and we'll send the slides out here. So I'm going to add the control it to that last slide. So control it. Exhaust and ventilation rates. We do have to meet the requirements. Those have changed recently in terms of the pandemic requirements, but still, we don't want to go beyond what we need to be doing. And the same thing with lighting as examples, right? Where we can control lighting, keep it to the times that when we need it. And in fact, if we use the right kind of control, I manage a property in our community, we actually use motion sensors and light sensors to enhance security. Because when somebody walks into an area, having a much brighter light come on when they didn't realize it was going to be there actually improves security as well. So there's lots of benefits, even on the waste side of it. So moving on then, we want to improve efficiency. And I always start with operational efficiency. This is an example from my own house, where I was away for a few months and the person here wasn't changing the filter in my furnace regularly. There's an example. A clean filter required 111 watts to circulate air through my house and my office, but the dirty filter requires 353. That's a high efficiency furnace, right? So, I mean, this will happen in many types of air handling systems in commercial buildings. I mean, I know that's a home residential example, but good maintenance, good operational practice is at the core of this whole thing. Same thing on the combustion side of it, making sure that that combustion equipment is tuned up on a regular basis. Simple things that will contribute to the longevity of the equipment, but also optimal energy efficiency. And then we can move to the technological side of things, where we're putting in better controls and sequencing multiple boilers, maybe changing boilers, adding variable speed drives. That's a common one in a few of the case studies I've looked at around multi-unit residential buildings in terms of makeup air units and domestic cold water booster pumps, and even heating and cooling water circulating pumps too, depending on the situation. And then ultimately the things that get a lot more expensive necessarily, the building envelope improvements. No, there can be operational improvements around weather stripping and that type of thing, but ultimately replacing elements of a building, which can have a big impact, can be relatively expensive. Maybe you can align that with our asset management process as well. Lighting, boilers and chillers, all those large pieces of equipment. So to summarize, we can actually improve efficiency through operational and technological means, but even before that, we want to consider getting rid of waste, matching the requirement through both manual control. That's where we might have to consider the human element a lot more strongly. And even if we move to automatic control, making sure that the humans involved in the system, the people involved, the tenants and so on, even operators in the building, are taking advantage of that control properly rather than defeating it. And I've seen that many times where if we don't engage people and we do involve technology too soon, we may actually end up stepping backwards from where we want to be. So ultimately, step 7 says, look at the supply side options. But necessarily, what you want to think about this either in conjunction with reducing waste or increasing efficiency, or at least after doing those things, because those steps 5 and 6, the waste and efficiency steps, minimize the requirement. At that point, we're in a good position to then optimize the supply against that new requirement. It doesn't make any sense to put solar collectors, PV panels on the roof to overcome wasteful and inefficient uses of electricity. Likewise, with an air-to-air heat pump or air source heat pump, we want to make sure that we minimize the load on that before we actually invest in that new technology. Same thing with drain water heat recovery. I'm showing on the right-hand picture there. Want to make sure that we're not putting excessive amounts of water down the drain at a higher temperature than we need to, and we size the heat recovery system for that new requirement. Then we have essentially the optimal situation through that deep energy retrofit, which basically once you get to step 7, you're deep into an energy retrofit for sure. All right. So in summary, the 7 steps, the good audit methodology, and actually some of the documents that I'll reference later will talk to the audits. And I think at the core of any energy audit, that's what you're looking at. The audit is what's going to find your opportunities in some ways if you're not already aware of those things. In terms of conducting audits, there's lots of support for that. I know that the speakers that will follow me will speak to some of that support in terms of understanding where your opportunities lie, where your the improvements are that you can actually make. I believe in not just getting an energy audit done by someone outside the facility. I also believe in involving internal staff to as large extent as possible, maybe involved with some external folks and vendors. And also to distinguish between audits and existing building commissioning. They both involve an investigation, but they are after completely different things. So just keep that in mind. I'll refer to this thing called existing building commissioning, where you take what you have and make it better in a few minutes. All right, planning for audits. It's something I think that, or audits for planning, one way or the other, it's something you have to contemplate well. A lot of money gets spent on energy audits that isn't necessarily used properly. I'm referring to an CHRA audit here in this reference. CHRA level 2 is kind of where I think you want to be in most cases. I'll let you read upon what that means. But a key thing when an audit is done, it's got to be objective. If we use a vendor of a particular product, they're going to actually try to sell their product in many cases. It needs to provide good information. Just talking to a building folks with social housing out in the West earlier this morning, and they want to make sure that they have that breakdown of where all the energy is going. Many audits don't do that, and they certainly don't address the emission thing properly. They need to account for interactions between measures. I'll show you that in red screen. If you do 2 things at the same time, you can actually, one will interact with the other. So if you take the measures independently and add them all up, you're going to get the wrong answer. So you need to use a tool that can deal with that integration. You need to treat energy as an investment and do the right financials, and then provide for both capital and O&M improvements together, and build a robust financial analysis as a result of the whole package. Red screen, which I'll highlight there just before we finish, actually does a really good job of bringing all those things together. In doing the research for this one, I'd never seen this document before, and I was kind of surprised at it. It's kind of neat. Again, I'm not going to walk through it. This is one of those ones that I'd like you to go and take a moment to walk through if you haven't already seen this. But it's a PDF file, and it basically just walks through a building looks at a number of different aspects. It identifies 4 or 5 or 6 different themes: space and water heating, ventilation, air quality, the building envelope, measurement, control, and accountability. lighting and plug loads, and water consumption. And this looks at each of these different areas and talks about what opportunities might exist, where the greatest efficiencies. So for example, if we're looking at the building envelope, thermal bridging in a lot of multi-unit residential buildings, where the insulation that's there is defeated by architectural aspects of the building, where the structure has to project through the insulation. So it deals with the reality of many of the things you're going to find in multi-unit residential buildings, and it does it kind of in a visual way. So again, my purpose here isn't to take you through all this, is to highlight that this is a good thing to go and have a look at, and it's actually a visually interesting thing to take a look at. So I'm going to leave that with you. Bottom line is, it highlights is just a ton of opportunities in many buildings, and the case studies that you're going to see in my presentation and the ones that follow, I think, make that abundantly obvious as well. So the references there for that particular little tour. Now, hats off to, I think this article was written by the speaker that follows me, Caitlin. Yeah, absolutely. It was funny. I use the words on the left in almost every workshop that I do. But then when I said, let's find a reference within the multi-unit residential sector, the first one that came up on my Google search was to Taff and Caitlin Carroll's article on indoor environmental quality. Not indoor air quality, indoor environmental quality, all the aspects, right? So I'm going to let Caitlin speak to that one if you'd like to. But the bottom line here is that if we do this energy thing properly, then we're going to get that indoor environmental quality improvement as well. But we have to make sure we do the energy thing properly. And it can cover air quality, comfort, and security in safety and security in so many different ways. Beyond those things, maintenance, reduce tenant concerns, renewal of the asset, water, and community engagement is an example here of a case study. Now, I captured this case study, I don't know, about 10 years ago when I was doing some work in the social housing sector. And I wasn't able to find the reference to it. So Emily, what we can do if people are interested in this was a great example over in the UK, where they were actually using energy as part of an engagement tactic within social housing. There was another example where they, in a low-income housing, where they had youth in the community that were vandalizing properties. They actually trained them on doing the energy efficiency improvements in the facilities that they lived in. There was more pride in what they did. Well, there was pride in what they did, and they began to respect what they did. So there's a lot of opportunities like that aren't technical, but I think they have a lot of merit. So Emily, if you'd like, I'll send along a sort of a library of those case studies, which are actually quite nice on the community engagement side of things. So from a generic standpoint, a guideline for doing retrofits is available from NRCan, called the Major Energy Retrofit Guidelines. It talks about an assessment, planning, implementation, and maintenance. And all of those things are important. And the maintenance piece, I like to stress, that's about persistence. It's one thing to implement things, but over the last 40 years, I've seen so many things done and then undone because there wasn't a persistence phase. There wasn't training, there wasn't monitoring, and there wasn't a way to make sure or sort of do that quality assurance, as it were, for that energy retrofit. So I'm going to strongly encourage you to think about doing that with any of the projects you might undertake. In this guide, they talk about a staged approach, one that begins with optimizing the equipment you have, the existing building commissioning, moves to a lighting upgrade, to reducing the loads in the building, dealing with the air distribution and heat distribution, cooling distribution systems, and eventually gets to the major equipment. Now, somewhere in there might be envelope improvements, right? That really depends on the circumstance that you're in. But this sequenced approach actually makes sense because it allows you to begin with what this guide here talks about is a tune-up to keep costs down, and then allows you to develop a more complete water and energy reduction program. So I'm kind of flipping back and forth here, but that is another guide that's specifically designed for your sector from CMHC. I found that one particularly useful. And within the original one, they talked about aligning the whole process with your asset renewal process. And I think that's a technique that's used by many organizations today. You've probably already thought about this, nothing new here. But again, rather than starting afresh on this energy thing, let's see whether we can bring it alongside what we have to do in our facilities anyway, and maybe accelerate some of those asset replacements based on their energy efficiency opportunities or their carbon reduction opportunities, depending on how you monetize that. And the carbon thing is going to become monetized, meaning it will become a dollar thing pretty quickly here. So again, another guide. This one's far more specific and tailored to your sector. have a look at that one. There should be a reference on that slide, but there isn't, but I'll make sure there gets one added before the slides are sent out. When it comes to actually making decisions around improving energy efficiency, I always like to point out that there's really 3 gates one has to go through. So if you're presenting a business case for doing this, you've got the operational side of it. You know, is it practical to do this? The financial side, does it meet some financial criteria? But eventually, how do we fit this whole thing into the strategic direction of the organization to make sure that we're not sort of fighting with the strategic direction, in fact, harmonizing with it and working within it? So, you know, this slide, the purpose here was really to point out that there's 3 gates that any proposal you make around improving efficiency is going to face essentially 3 decision points. And you know, any one of those can cause that project to fail or not move forward, or set of projects to not move forward. So in terms of developing a business case around it, I like to highlight the fact that we're going to reduce both operating and maintenance costs. We're going to potentially enhance the asset value of the property, maybe less so in a social housing context than in a commercial property, but still important to know that your property is not diminishing in value, but in fact growing in value because your energy improvements. You're definitely going to address tenant comfort and satisfaction. You'll extend the life of the building components in many cases. Building envelope improvements, which do the energy thing properly, will have that impact. They are more expensive, granted, but they do have a very positive impact. And making the major repairs count. So basically, when you do put money into things, right, and we can get a return from those things beyond just necessarily having to spend money to make those repairs, that return increases your return on investment. And to that point, I'll send the spreadsheet along, because I really truly believe that energy efficiency has to be treated as an investment opportunity and not simply as just a cost of doing business. No, right? If we invest properly, if we make the right assumptions and we do the right financial analysis, here's an example of, you know, a project that we invested in that would cost us $360,000, and it would in fact save us about $90,000 a year. Over 10 years, that project is like investing money in the bank at, well, minimally 12%, maybe close to 26%. It has a net present value well over what you invested to begin with, this over $600,000, or what I like to say, a savings to investment ratio or benefit to cost ratio of almost 3, meaning over 10 years, that project returns 3 times as much money as you put into it. That is a very good investment. Energy efficiency is a very good investment. And RETScreen actually has all the tools to deal with that. I'll highlight that in a second when I jump into RETScreen. RETScreen is both a technical tool and a financial tool. So I'm just going to pop it open here. You will have access to this tool for, I think the license you have, Emily, is a 14-day license, but you can use the tool. You just won't be able to save beyond the terms of that license. If you purchase the tool, you in fact get 10 seats, meaning 10 licenses, so it can be used across an organization. It seems a bit expensive for some people to begin with, but when you sit down and work out, all the different people can use this thing, all the way from doing feasibility analysis, understanding what you could do, to actually doing monitoring, which this tool does very well, and reporting across a portfolio. It becomes actually a relatively inexpensive tool. What I wanted to highlight right here today was just the idea that I can go in here and I can model all the opportunities in a building. So here I have a multi-unit residential building. In fact, to do this, there's a neat little tool in here called the Virtual Energy Analyzer. I can click in here. I can put a pin on the map anywhere on the surface of the earth. It's going to grab the climate data location for that location. It's going to open up the type of building I asked it to open up. So I said, give me an apartment high rise. And this is what it came up with. And then I can go and look at this building and play with it a little bit. So it's a great what if analysis tool. I can turn measures on and off. So each of these lines here is an area of energy use in the building, but each of these items over here are the savings measures that exist within the building. So if I want to have a package that has a simple payback of 1.7 years, right? That's my first level financial analysis. I can do that, or I can start to turn on and off projects. I can turn all the projects off, and I can say, I just want to do, let's just turn them all off here. I just want to do building envelope, right? And say corridor ventilation, right? And I can turn those projects on, and it'll give me an overall project. So I can include in this down here, I can include a solar water heater, or maybe I don't want the solar water heater, but I do want to have the photovoltaic panel on the roof. So I can basically mix and match projects. I have the ability to dive into any one of these things and do a detailed financial analysis. So for those that are technical, there is a tool to do this. I would strongly recommend, if you're going to get an energy audit or assessment done, that you ask for a specific tool like this, not necessarily have to be RedScreen, but make sure that the auditors, the people doing the assessment, can present you with the information and allow you, as I said before, to interact. These measures all interact with one another. I can then actually do emissions analysis, so it shows me very quickly what all these projects are going to save. I can dial in the fact that I have a greenhouse gas tax or carbon tax right now of $40, which is going to escalate over the next number of years. And that actually monetizes it, builds it into my financial analysis. If you're not in Ontario, you can simply pick the province where you're actually operating, and it will adjust all of the analysis. So if you are in, say, Alberta, where you may have much more carbon in your grid, then your electrical measures will be much more impactful from a carbon standpoint. That can be determined here fairly easily. I mean, it's just a few clicks, really. And the neat thing I like here is it allows you to actually express the result here in terms of things that mean something to people, maybe. So this project in this multi-unit residential building is like planting 58.8 acres of forest absorbing carbon at maturity. Wow, that's a lot. Or I think the original one was cars and light trucks not used. So you can actually put this in terms that maybe mean something to people. Tons of CO2 may not mean something. And then eventually you can develop a financial plan. That is a financial analysis, kind of like going to your financial planner, but treating energy efficiency as an investment and being able to see the cash flow that does ensue from this. And I'll tell you right now, I've seen projects that didn't fly. Once it was put on a graph like this, where you have a cumulative cash flow that's being adjusted for inflation and other financial factors like discount rate, the project went ahead, simply because folks didn't realize how impactful as an investment that project really was. So I won't spend a lot more time on RedScreen. I really, really recommend that you have a look at it at least. And again, even explore things like the portfolio examples in here. I'll show you very quickly. I'm going to pop up my portfolio example. When you go into RedScreen and you want to learn more about something that maybe, hey, I wish I could go to a workshop and look at this, but you don't have time to do that, I'm going to show you a neat little tool you have. Throughout RedScreen, typically there are going to be little things called e-learning icons up here. It's called e-learning. And if you click on the e-learning icon, there's actually online videos on RedScreen's YouTube site, which take you through how to use or how this element of the software is used. So take a look at those, and they're throughout the software. It's kind of like a embedded video help in the software. So I'll leave that thought with you. And I'm going to finish off here. I think I've got about 2 or 3 minutes left, if I'm not mistaken. So another great example of some buildings. Now, you're going to see a case study after this, which I think is a little bit more up to date than this one. But what I liked about these 3 case studies that I'll just touch on very quickly is that they all show very, very nice financial impacts. So what I've done here for each of the projects, and the original case study in this document actually didn't, I think it calculated the simple payback, but I prefer this thing called the benefit to cost ratio, or the net present value, because as a financial person, they're going to look at that and go, well, that's something that's going to be worth considering. So here's the first example, and some of you may recognize that building. I don't know. I think that building's in Toronto. So there was a condensing boiler applied. There was speed control applied to domestic cold water booster and a makeup air fan. There was a lighting retrofit done, and there was an extensive program of water reduction across toilet shower heads and aerators. But I think the thing that's really compelling to me is that this project over a 10-year period will deliver almost twice as much money as was put into it. That's an attractive investment. And I'm not going to repeat that statement for the rest of these, but this one's even better. This one's a benefit to cost ratio of 2.6. Similar to what happened before, but this one dealt with the addition of a building automation system, and even stuff such as mundane as exterior door seals, weather stripping. I mean, it makes sense. Now, we have to revisit that one on a regular basis, but none of this stuff is rocket science. Honestly, this is all basic stuff, and it has a very good investment return. And the final case study, this one actually dealt with the domestic hot water boiler replacement and CO, or carbon monoxide control, on the garage fan. So there were similar elements to all of them. They all had drives on domestic cold water and booster pumps, and on the makeup air fan, lighting retrofit, water reduction. But each one had automation, and one here has the garage fan seal control. But again, the financials are, I think, very positive on this. What I didn't calculate here, because I didn't have the energy numbers, but was the greenhouse gas emissions. But I can almost guarantee you those would just be the icing on the cake, for the simple reason that many of these items are going to impact on natural gas consumption, and that's going to deliver quite a nice reward in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So on that note, I think I'm done. I'll display for you what I call the help desk. That's my invitation to you, without restriction, without reservation, to help you answer your questions after this session. That's a lifetime guarantee, meaning as long as I can continue to answer your questions. And I got an email from someone the other day. I don't know if you remember me, Steve, but 12 years ago, I was in one of your sessions. I got a question about something. Not a problem. And actually, that person went on to do some great things with actually the piece of software called RedScreen, because his question was best answered with a tool like that. So on that note, I thank you for your time and your attention today, and I look forward to hearing the presentations that follow. Over to you, Caitlin, I believe.
Thank you. I think we're just gonna get the slides up here. But thank you for showing my article. I did write that.
That was amazing. Like it was so well written, and that little graphic you had in there, which just shows, like, highly recommend anybody go and read that article, because it makes the case that much stronger for doing efficiency. Thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'll just get started. It's a really brief presentation, but I just wanted to go through sort of the case for deep tower retrofits and talking about some of our past projects. Just a little bit, if you want to go to the next slide. Just a little bit about the Atmospheric Fund. We are a regional climate agency that invests in low carbon solutions for the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area to help scale them up for broader implementation. And I work on the retrofits team. Next slide, please. So project overview here. This project was done in partnership with Toronto Community Housing, and it involves 7 multi-unit residential buildings spread across 3 different sites in Toronto. And the buildings were built between 1965 to 1975 with a mix of high-rise and mid-rise buildings. And that's actually a picture of one of them there. Next, please. And the project objectives that we came together with Toronto Community Housing on, first of all, we wanted to aim for 30% GHG emission reductions. And at TAF, we now actually consider that to be a shallow retrofit. This project was taking place between 2015 to 2018, with the retrofit reaching substantial completion in 2016. But now with TAF and our retrofits, we're looking to go deeper for GHG reduction of 40% or more. But we are also looking at a 20% utility cost reduction, as well as significant indoor environmental quality improvements. So as was mentioned, indoor environmental quality is not just air quality, but also lighting quality, thermal comfort, and other aspects of the building, which we all found to be really important. Next, please. So how are we going to go about reaching these objectives? Well, we took a different approach than sort of the more traditional one. We wanted to do integrated design. So integrated design has a focus on collaboration and iteration, and it focuses on finding synergies and savings within the project. So more time spent upfront in the design process leads to less changes later, reducing the project cost. And it also means that basically all of the project participants are kind of together in one room, breaking down the silos, which I think was really helpful to achieving the lofty goals that we set out. If you can go to the next one. So we had a number of design inputs, which actually was just spoken to by Stefan, but building audits, building condition assessments, as well as feasibility studies were all really important in informing design. As well, we did pre-retrofit surveys to understand occupant behavior and comfort. So we found that this was really important in identifying opportunities for improvement, especially around the IEQ aspects. In these buildings, they all had older gas boilers with hydronic radiator heating systems. And one of the largest issues that we discovered from talking to residents through these surveys was that it's just too hot in their suites, even in the heating system, in the heating season, which led them to open the windows on a regular basis to cool down their suites. And now we just have a whole bunch of energy wasted. We actually continue to apply surveys to all of our projects going forward. Yeah, next. And in resident engagement is another key aspect of any project. It's important to reach out to the residents regularly and communicate in a consistent way. So even like the branding of the flyers and the colors, it has to be consistent. We reached out to the residents through, posters in their lobbies, through notices door to door, as well as town halls. And in some cases, if there was a new type of system that they would have to interact with, we would do training sessions as well. We consider resident survey another form of engagement, as it lets us get their feedback. And we try to translate communications into the dominant languages of the site as well, just to make sure that everybody had access to the information. So what we're trying to do going forward, and we've had a lot of success with this, is to hold some sort of resident barbecue or engagement event, either just prior to commencing construction or at the completion. Because what we realize is that all of these retrofits, for us at least, are happening with residents in place. And it's really important to acknowledge that they are contributing to the project success as well. And it's also a great avenue to just provide any additional education or answer questions for them. Yeah, next. So you probably want to know what did we actually do in these projects. So first of all, we looked at the domestic hot water and space heating systems. We upgraded the old boilers to condensing boilers, and we worked really hard at load matching to reduce overheating. In some cases where a boiler had been replaced recently, we recommissioned that boiler in order to keep it in space. And I believe one of the first in Canada demonstrations of gas absorption heat pumps. The aim of all of these ECMs is, to reduce energy consumption, but also to improve the thermal comfort for residents. And we partnered with Ecobee to introduce smart thermostats at a couple of the sites. Previously, there were no suite level controls in those buildings, so it was really great for residents to have some control over their space and their individual comfort. As well, we did makeup air unit replacement, heat recovery ventilation, and it was previously mentioned, introducing VFDs with scheduling on the makeup air. And I think what maybe wasn't mentioned, duct cleaning is often overlooked, but it's really valuable from an IEQ standpoint and an energy standpoint. So just ensuring that there's regular duct cleaning was really important project outcome. And then we also looked at the interior and exterior lighting upgrades, as well as water fixtures with introducing low flow toilets. And all of these things are really great. But I think if we were to redo this retrofit today, we'd probably push for going even deeper and looking at introducing some sort of heat pump system, and perhaps even fuel switching would be really important. But at the time, this is what we were able to accomplish. Next, please. So here's just sort of the impacts of energy conservation measures. I won't read through all of the numbers. You can just read that on your own. But what I will note is that this slide kind of speaks to two important things. One, as you can see, some of the savings did vary between the sites, and they didn't quite reach our initial goals. This really spoke to the need for continuous commissioning, and commissioning is just so important in that first year. You really want to make sure that you have a commissioning plan and that you are working on that, and that will help you realize the full potential of your retrofit. And then another thing, we had really outstanding success with the water measures. And I think by undertaking this sort of multi-measure retrofit, you're able to realize greater savings, and some of the, it can help you offset some of the capital costs by getting that low-hanging fruit right away. And then for the emission reductions here, again, we reached 22% emission reductions. And what we would do in the future is probably fuel switching, just so that we can reach more lofty goals. Next, please. I really like this slide because I get to highlight the IEQ benefits that we saw. So based on the post-retrofit surveys that we did, we compared pre and post. Residents were more comfortable after the retrofit, and they were not opening the windows as much, which was confirmed both by a visual audit and in the survey, which means that we curbed that energy loss considerably, and we also improved their comfort. There were 32% less reports of overheating on the post-retrofit survey. And then with all that duct cleaning and MAU improvements, we actually saw 31% decrease in odor complaints from residents too, which made me really happy because I believe that was like the second largest issue they had been facing after overheating. So these are all really positive things that came out of the retrofit. Next, please. And just briefly looking at the financials here, I think simple payback came up in the previous presentation as well. And so the simple payback for this project was 7.9 years. And like overall, it's a really successful project financially. However, you know, going deeper with retrofits, we might not see the same business case. And so actually TAF, we put out a report in the past year or so called the Case for Deep Energy Retrofits. It's on our website. And I would really recommend you to read that more in depth, but essentially relying on simple payback alone as an evaluator of success is insufficient. The perceived the perceived business case for building retrofits at a deeper scale can be improved dramatically for most projects by improving the quality and completeness of that business case evaluation. So what that means is including things like life cycle cost assessment, as well as co-benefits like the improved health and wellness of the residents, or the opportunity to create green jobs, or similar job programs to what was just mentioned by Stephen in the last presentation, and also the avoided energy infrastructure investments. So there's a lot of ways to look at the business case that are more holistic, and that's just my suggestion would be to read that and understand that as well. And this is the last slide here, so I'll just briefly summarize. So retrofits can achieve significant energy savings as well as noticeable indoor and quality improvements. That's very obvious from what I've shown. Resident engagement is really integral to success, and it should also be used to inform design. And then while the business case for deeper retrofits is challenging, doing a shallow retrofit now, I think, might make it more difficult to go deeper in the future because you'll already be kind of locked in. So I would really suggest that building owners consider going deeper now, and that's going to be in line with a lot of what you're seeing from, you know, different municipalities with their like 2040 climate initiatives and plans like that. So it's a great time to kind of get on board. And I'll end off by saying like what TAF is currently working on that I'm really excited about. We have a number of projects. So we're looking at some overcladding projects, which are based upon passive house standards and trying to achieve EnerPHit, if you are aware of that. As well as potential district energy projects. And there's just like a lot of cool, innovative things going on right now. So I think that this is a time to, you know, keep the momentum going with the projects that you're looking at, and you're going to see really great outcomes. Last slide. If you're interested in learning more, you can just read our case studies at taf.ca/retrofit accelerator. That'll go more into depth on the project that I briefly showcased today. And I would like to turn it over to Jen, who's gonna finish up the session.
Thanks so much, Caitlin and Stephen. I'm just processing a lot. There's a lot of such fantastic information in there, and just building on what Caitlin was mentioning around the broader consideration and case for retrofits, business case for retrofits, a piece of work that we've been doing that I presented in one of the previous sessions from this retrofit series that we've been doing with CHRAs around energy poverty in non-market housing, and the rates are quite high when you consider individuals who are living in non-market housing and paying for utilities. 37% of those individuals are paying more than twice the national average in utilities. So just yet another consideration when it comes to affordability and the impact that some of these measures can have. So the next slide, please. At the end of the day, though, we do know, even if there's fantastic overall kind of returns in the end from an investment perspective, we know that capital is needed to actually make these projects come to life and get started. And that's really where we can come in to help. So we have, I'm going to keep it really brief because we've only got a few minutes left and I want to save some time for questions, but we have funding that can help you right from the very earliest stages of inception of your project with planning grants. It's a fast, easy application. And the idea there is to really get your energy efficient project off the ground, right through to capital financing options. Since we're talking about retrofits today, I'll highlight that our program is really there to support providers who are striving to go deeper. So we match our grant amount with the level of anticipated energy improvement, starting at 25% and up to 50%. So if you're looking to achieve a 50% savings in energy, you could get a 50% grant for your project, and actually 60% for projects that are in the north, because we have a little additional grant there. So we're certainly here to help and support through funding. The next slide, please. And also in resources and tools. So I will mention that our funding is stackable with the National Housing Strategy programs, but also provincial, municipal, and private dollars. We have a fantastic team in place at FCM who can help you. If you have a project idea and want to know how it fits in, please contact us. We'll help with advice and guidance from that earliest stage all the way through contracting. We'll be there to help you through the whole process. We have lots of tools and resources available as well. We have an application guide. We have fact sheets on our website. We have case studies like that excellent project that Caitlin highlighted. We have a resource library as well that actually I recognized one of those studies that Stephen showed, that we have a link to that in our resource library. So our resource library is curated based on basically the stage of a project that you're at, and brings in great resources and tools that are out there related to energy efficiency, kind of all in one place for you. We have a community of practice for early stage retrofit projects, so you can learn from your peers as you make your way through the process. And then we have regional energy coaches. And if we go to the next slide, there's a little bit more information on them here. So Stephen was talking about energy assessments and then CHRA level 2 audits. So regional energy coaches are a great place to start if you want to go down this path. Our regional energy coaches can do that walk through energy assessment, and they'll do it with internal staff. So Stephen gave that advice too, of kind of having internal staff along the way. And then they can set you up and prepare you to do that next stage, that level 2 energy audit, or help you help apply for some funding to actually get to that point. So they're there to kind of help you figure out how to incorporate energy efficiency into your retrofit. We've partnered with BC Nonprofit Housing Association, Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, and the Community Housing Transformation Center. We have regional energy coaches at each of those organizations there to support you. And you can find a link on how to connect with them on our website too, which is on the last slide, which is fcm.ca. If you keep it for, there we go, fcm.ca/sustainable affordable housing. So I'll leave it there. Thanks so much.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jen, and to Caitlin and Stephen as well for your great presentations. On that note, we are going to open the floor to questions for the last 5-6 minutes that we have together. So if you haven't done so already, please type them in the Q&A box on the webinar control panel now. Just to kick things off, are there any lessons learned from your experiences that you didn't go into depth about, but you think the audience would benefit from hearing?
I'm going to kick that over to either Stephen or Caitlin. I feel like they're best placed.
Well, I want to reiterate what Jen, what you just said about or actually what Caitlin said about the continuous commissioning, right? And this doesn't just apply in your housing context, but this is right across the board. I've seen that's probably one of the greatest failures of a lot of deep energy retrofits, where if there are complex technologies used, automation, so on, if you don't pay attention at the end there, if you don't support your people and you don't engage them, and in fact, even engaging staff, right, who operate a building at the beginning stages, as you just talked about, Jen, and then taking them right through to the end and making them part of that process for persistence, handoff, and sustaining the savings. That to me is, I think, one of the greatest lessons I've learned over the years, is you got to involve people from the beginning to the end, which means continuously.
I guess
Caitlin or Jen?
I'll add, I guess, one that I a little bit touched on, but just like the resident education component, if there's any sort of like systems that they're going to be involved with, I think, you know, especially around controls, we've seen that it is a struggle to kind of get people on board with controls and the best way to like set their systems and user systems. So making sure that the resident feels comfortable and that they're getting the most out of everything is really important in those situations.
Thanks, Caitlin.
I guess maybe I love both of those pieces of advice. I think another piece for consideration is really thinking about the energy efficiency right from the outset of a project can help you save time and costs throughout. So okay, so I'll just pitch our planning grant again as a great opportunity to get some of that going. But kind of regardless, I think tying those pieces between your building condition assessment, your asset management plan with energy efficiency, and taking the opportunity to find some efficiencies in terms of funding your projects by doing these things together and planning them that way, I think is a good thing to be thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, thank you. So I think you all touched on this, but just to reiterate, where can today's listeners go to learn more about the tools and case studies that were discussed today? Maybe I'll throw it over to Jen first, and then we'll do a little caterpillar.
Yeah, sure. And I can put the link in the chat too, but fcm.ca/sustainable affordable housing. We have case studies, fact sheets. We have a resource library there. And we also have contact information for our regional energy coaches too. And our application guide and all of the information about our funding. Basically everything is on our website.
Caitlin?
Yeah, so we also have a page on our TAF website. It's taf.ca/retrofit accelerator. You can also just go to taf.ca and it's pretty easy to find in the program section, but that's where all of our case studies lived, and I'm happy to send that in the chat as well.
Thanks, Caitlin. Stephen?
Well, I don't have a website. I like that. I have a website, but I don't have one that has all those resources because we work in so many sectors. And I don't think I could even come close to touching what FCM and TAF have. But for my part, what I'll make sure is that the final version of the slides that send out to Emily, which I believe are going to be distributed, I'll make sure that they're properly footnoted. I think there was 2 missing. That's where I would go to look for those links. I'll also make sure that I think there was a spreadsheet in there too, or 2. I'll make sure that additional things that you cannot find on the web that I have personally, I will send those along, and Emily can make sure those get sent out.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Stephen. So I think we have time for one more quick question that was sent through the chat, directed at Caitlin. Caitlin, you mentioned an energy reduction technology, which might be called field searching. Can you briefly explain that or elaborate?
I think it's because I was just talking too fast. I was talking about fuel switching. So in the case of these like gas heated buildings, we're looking at fuel switching to electric heated with heat pumps. Yeah, sorry, that's just, I was talking too quick.
Thanks, Caitlin. So on that note, we're going to wrap up today's webinar. Thank you to everybody for participating, and to Stephen, Caitlin, and Jen for the informative presentations. We'll be sending a follow-up email with a copy of the slides to registrants in the coming days, along with a link to the recording for today's webinar. Thank you, everybody. Take care and have a happy, safe, and healthy holiday season.
Thank you.